accept the honor today of introducing our speaker. Our speaker today is Bruce Shelton. It was once said long ago, and there are also so many other things which he did, which if they could be written every one, I suppose even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written. Well, Bruce is almost at that level. You would see him as our senior pastor. You see him as our music minister. But for everything you don't see Bruce doing, he does 10 things that behind the scenes. He's also the head of our buildings and grounds department, has been for many years, and that entails countless things right there. Being here at all hours, meeting with contractors, arranging for payment of contractors, supervising work. When an airplane flies, it isn't really the wings that are holding it up. It's really the invisible air above and below the wings that actually provide the lift. So Bruce has been the wind beneath the wings of this fellowship for longer than I can remember. So without further ado, please welcome our senior pastor, Bruce Shelton.
Thank you, Lloyd. Well, it's my pleasure to be here today to talk to you. We're going to talk about Jacob today and his wrestling with the angels. Now, whenever I talk here, as those of you who have heard me before know I like to do this, if we could just have a few moments of silence, and I'd like to call upon God to just clear my channel here, clear my mind, that I can speak His Word to you this morning. So if we could just all pray together just for a moment. Thank you, Lord. Okay. The title of today's talk is Wrestling with an Angel. And it comes from this story about Jacob is found in Genesis chapter 32, verses 24 through 32. Lloyd read those verses to you today. This is a story that is really about ourselves when we're facing the dark night of our soul. We're facing very serious problems in our life. Our anxiety is up. We're worried. And wrestling with the angel, it has to do with the whole idea of wrestling with between my ego, saying this is horrible, this is terrible, this is a catastrophe, things are going to be horrible here, which is so easy to get lost in that train of thought, and my spiritual self, which is saying, hold true to your highest spiritual beliefs. Hold true to your faith. God will get you through this storm that you're going through right now. So his story is really all about the inner struggle that we all go through when we're facing difficult times in our life. Now, before I get into the story in more depth, I'd like to just speak a little bit about the Bible in general. First point, 2 points I'd like to make. Number one is that the Bible is always written in a way that it's meant to be taken not just the literal meaning, but also, more importantly, the spiritual meaning. Figuring out the spiritual meaning behind all these stories in the Bible is the real challenge. And this is where spiritual teachers come in. And the great spiritual teacher in my life for the Bible has been Emmett Fox. I discovered his book when I was 16 years of age called The Sermon on the Mount, and for the very first time I had an interpretation of the teachings of Jesus that just made so much sense to me. Now that happened when I was 16, and now I'm somewhat older, and he's still the primary person that's really helped me to understand the Bible. What I'll be sharing with you today largely comes from Emmett Fox's teachings. Two other important teachers in my life have been, first one was Edgar Casey. I started reading Casey work when I was 19. Now, Edgar Casey read the Bible through in its entirety, the equivalent of one time through for every year of his life. Now, he lived 67 years. That means he read the Bible from beginning to end a total of 67 times. Now, for a guy like Casey to put so much importance upon the Bible, and I view him as one of the great saints of the 20th century, there's got to be something to this book, you see. And it was really the focus of his whole spiritual life. His readings are all laced with these teachings about that come right from the Bible. The other great important spiritual teacher in my life has been Paul Solomon. Paul Solomon was born into a Baptist family. His dad was a Baptist minister. He would do regular Bible study during the week. And when he became older, he went to Baptist seminary. And what do you study in Baptist seminary? The Bible. So he was a master of the Bible. And then he had a spiritual breakthrough. I was told this happened around 1972 when he started doing readings. And he, for the first time, he took it to another level, his understanding of the Bible. He gave a series of Sunday talks here back in the 70s and 80s. He called it the Come Alive Bible Talks. Some of you may remember them. They're still available on CDs. But he was able to take the Bible and make it come alive. For example, if you've ever read the books of Numbers and Leviticus, it's kind of like reading this Virginia State Code. It's all about the Mosaic Law, at least parts of it. And he made it exciting. Now I thought, this is a true master of the Bible to make books like Leviticus and Numbers actually interesting when he would give his Sunday talks. And so the Bible is meant to be taken on these different, the most important thing about the Bible stories is understanding the spiritual teaching. The Bible is filled with metaphors, allegories, symbols, and Jesus used the word parables. For example, the story of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve is obviously meant to be taken as an allegory. I would challenge anyone who would say Adam and Eve, the story of Adam and Eve is meant to be taken literally, and there are many people who believe this, to just go to Google and Google tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I will guarantee you'll never find any botanist in this planet that's ever found a tree called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is the central metaphor in the story of Adam and Eve. Obviously, the whole story is meant to be taken allegorically, using metaphors and symbols. The story of the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, these are meant to be taken as allegories. The second point I'd make about the Bible is that each person in the Bible represents you and me when we are in different states of consciousness. So sometimes some of the characters in the Bible are saints, some are sinners. The rest kind of fall in between the two extremes, just like most of us. We have our high side when we're trying to be loving to everyone, like Lloyd was talking about earlier in the service. It's easy to love God. What about loving the neighbor? And as Lloyd put it, have you met them yet? Have you seen them? That's the challenge. So we have this, each one of us has got a fear side to us that causes us to be judgmental sometimes and to deal with resentments. Whenever I find myself lost in a resentment, I immediately become aware, okay, I allowed a resentment to enter my mind. In AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about resentments. They say if you have a resentment towards anyone, you're allowing that person to rent space in your own mind. Now, why would we want to do that? Why would I at 3 o'clock in the morning be wanting to be thinking about how upset I am with somebody? At 3 in the morning, I've let that person in my mind. That person's probably home sleeping soundly, and I'm awake. So it's really crazy. So when I become aware I've got a resentment, I try to really work on letting it go. And so the characters in the Bible all represent different states of consciousness. That brings us to Jacob. Now, Jacob was a guy a lot like us. He had his strong points, but boy, he had some real weaknesses in his character. And I'm going to open the story here. He was in a part of the world called Mesopotamia, far from his home in Canaan. And he'd been there 20 years. By this time, he had married these two gals, Rachel and Leah. In order to do this, he had to work for their father, whose name was Laban. Laban was the head of the tribe, and he had to work 14 years to marry these two women. With these two women and their two maids, he gave birth to 11 sons. This is the 20-year mark. Later on, he gave birth, of course, to the 12th son. The 11th son was that guy that was made famous to us by Andrew Lloyd Webber, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. We all know that 11th son, right? Joseph. But he had the 11 sons now. And one night, Jacob has this dream. And in the dream, he had this very, very powerful vision. And the vision, he believed to come from the God of his granddad, who was Abraham, and the God of Isaac, his dad. This vision, this God that spoke to him said, "Now arise, get thee out from the land, and return into the land of thy kindred, and I will protect you." And so this must have been an extremely powerful vision, because the next day, he's been there 20 years. He's pulling up stakes, getting everybody ready. We're going back to Canaan. There was a big problem. The problem was this. 20 years earlier, when Jacob was living with his dad, he had cheated his brother Esau out of the inheritance. He had done this through manipulation, through deceit. He really had done his brother Esau, who was entitled to receive the full inheritance from his dad, which meant everything in those days. He tricked his dad into giving him the inheritance. So that was kind of the dark side of Jacob. So Esau, now he's this big hairy guy, strong guy. He's known as a hunter, and he puts the word out. He's going to kill his brother Jacob for doing this to him. And their mother, they were both twins, by the way. Their mother, who really liked Jacob more than Esau. Got to follow these names here. She said, "Jacob, you got to get out of here, buddy. Your brother wants to kill you, and I'm going to tell you, go live with my brother, who's Laban, in Mesopotamia. Just get out of town, because your brother's going to kill you as soon as your dad dies." Their dad Isaac was very old. So that's how Jacob ended up in Mesopotamia. So now Jacob's going back to Canaan, and he's thinking Esau could kill me. He's frightened. This is very scary. Esau had every reason to want to kill him. He had really done him wrong. And Esau was this big guy that was could be kind of frightening. So it took the point here, the teaching here is that it took tremendous faith on the part of Jacob, believing in this vision from God that he would be safe if he went back home. So with that faith, he traveled back home. Now on the way back, Jacob sent some messengers ahead of him. He kind of wanted to test the waters, I think. He wanted the messengers to go to Esau, tell Esau he's coming home, his long-lost brother. "I love you. I've got gifts," because at this time Jacob was very wealthy. He had his 11 sons, plus he had all this cattle and livestock. Goats and livestock in that day included goats and sheep and cattle and camels. He was very wealthy because God had blessed him, the Bible tells us. And so he's going back home to Esau. He sends these messengers ahead to kind of just test the waters. Well, the messengers come back and say, "Well, we talked to Esau. Esau said he's going to come to meet you. Oh, and by the way, he's got 400 armed men with him." Well, you can imagine Jacob's heart kind of sunk to his stomach. Why would he be coming with 400 armed men? He's going to lop my head off is what he's going to do. And so Jacob is really in panic mode right now, and I would be as well if I was in Jacob's shoes. Well, that night, before they were going to meet Esau with his 400 men, Jacob takes his entire caravan across a river called Jabbok, J-B-B-A-K, which stands in Hebrew, that means to wrestle. He carries them across this river, Jabbok, and they all set up camp for the night. Meanwhile, he goes off alone. He's totally by himself now. We're told that he's alone and the night is falling upon him. He's totally in the dark. In the Bible, there's meaning behind everything. And so the darkness in the Bible always represents a time when we feel separate from God, from the light of God. And he's feeling very separate, very alone. Also, when you and I have to face our deepest fears, the only person that can resolve those fears is ourselves. We have to do it alone. We can have other people encouraging us, but nobody can solve the fears that are within us. I sometimes refer to those as the dragons that are within us. Of a fear of death, for example. And he's facing the greatest fear that any of us could face. And so he's alone, it's a dark, and then in this darkness a man appears. That it appeared to be a man at first, and he starts wrestling with Jacob. And Jacob and him are wrestling throughout the night. And at one point this man he became aware that this was more than just a man. This was an angel. He could tell this was a very powerful experience. And of course, as I said in the very beginning of the talk, what was actually this whole story is about is the struggle that you and I go through in our own minds when we're dealing with our dark night of the soul. Think of times in your life when you've been faced with things that have just pushed all your fear buttons. Maybe it was a relationship problem, a job problem, a financial problem, a health problem. In our age, health has suddenly become a big deal. At the age of a lot of the folks in here. So we're facing that, and our fear is up, and the angel is fighting with him. He's struggling the higher side of him is struggling with his ego, which is saying this is going to be a catastrophe, you're going to die in the morning. And he's holding on to his faith. And the great teaching here that Jacob is giving us is the power of faith and perseverance. He held on. And the Bible tells us that he was left alone in the night, and the angel said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And Jacob said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. This is the key. Instead of giving up and surrendering to his ego and his deep fears, he held on, you see, to his faith in God. That's the great teaching here. And because of that, the angel then came back and said, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. He said, from this day forth you'll no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hath prevailed. And the angel blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, which means the face of God. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Now, to be blessed by God is what life's all about. This means making connection, a contact, communing with the highest part of who we are, the Christ within. In Hinduism, they use the word Atma. It's the same thing. It's the presence of living spirit within us. He held on, and he made that breakthrough, you see, and that was the great teaching here. Now, it's very important to understand the word Israel. His new name was Israel. Israel is a name that plays out throughout the entire Bible. The whole Bible takes place in Israel. And the word has great meaning. When we use the word Israelite in the Bible, it's referring to anyone who puts God first in their lives. Okay? Anyone who says that, God, I know my life is all about knowing you. Everything else comes under the category of fun and games. I've tried everything else. I know it doesn't lead anywhere. I just want to know you. I want to know you fully and completely. When you have that state of consciousness, you are an Israelite in the biblical sense. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. And everything when the Bible talks about the promises made to Israel that you'll prosper, and if you understand that teaching, those promises suddenly start to make sense. You and I will prosper if we put God first in our lives. The word Israel is broken up into 3 syllables. Israel. This word Israel has within it encoded a spiritual teaching that tells us about the divine nature of ourselves, okay, and the divine nature and character of God. This word represents, these 3 syllables tell us the secret. Represents the feminine side to ourself, okay, the feminine side. It comes from the Egyptian word for Isis, I-S-S-I-S, Isis. And Isis, of course, was the Egyptian goddess who was married to Osiris. In other cultures, later cultures, they gave different names to this goddess within ourselves. The Babylonians used the word Ishtar for their goddess. Greece, we all know about Aphrodite. Rome, Venus. And so this feminine side to ourself represents the side to ourself which is receptive, okay, that receives the energy from the universe. When we meditate, what are we doing? We're quietening our mind. We're seeking to allow Spirit to come to us. It comes right here in the heart. The focus of Jesus' ministry was all upon the heart. You know, what was the most important of all the commandments? Love the Lord thy God with all thy body, mind, and soul. Love thy neighbor as thyself. The focus of Jesus' ministry wasn't on thinking, being the most intellectual person in the class. It was all about the heart, you see. So this is the feminine. Now, the word Ra comes from the Egyptian word for Ra, which is the sun god in Egyptian mythology. Ra represents the masculine side to who we are. Okay, that's the head. It has to do with, it's the executive state of mind, the doer. So we receive inspirations and intuition in our heart through our meditations as to what to do. That's the beer part. I experience God's love. These inspirations then go to our head, and it says, do this, do that. You see, Bruce, get up and give a talk on Sunday morning. That's the executive side. It's the doer side. Now, we need both. It's not one more important. We need a balance between the two. The word the word El now is the third syllable in Israel. This was the word El was the favorite suffix of the Hebrews for God. Elohim was the name that the Hebrews particularly liked for God. It means God Almighty, God in greatness and fullness. El always means God in completeness. Notice when you look at read the Bible, how many words end in El? You have Bethel, which means house of God. El Beth El, which means God in the house of God. You have the three angels, Gabriel, Michael, Raphael. The El word is throughout is found throughout the Bible, and this represents the spiritual side to ourself. So the mother, the father come together and they give birth to the Christ child, which is El, the living presence of God within us. And this is the meaning of Israel. And so, in closing here, Jacob was an individual who started off with as Emmett Fox puts it, I'll use his words, a very unpleasant fellow. Emmett Fox is from the United Kingdom. A very unpleasant fellow in a very unsatisfactory manner. But he finished up as Israel, a prince of God. This is the story of you and me. This is the story of you and myself and anyone who puts God first in our lives. If we just hold true to our prayers, as several people today testified the power of prayer in their lives, if we hold true, the prayer will be answered. But we just have to be careful when we pray. Not, as Lloyd said earlier, we don't want to tell God how to answer the prayer. The prayer will be answered. It's absolutely impossible for any of us to pray without our prayers being heard and answered. But the answer will come in God's schedule and in a way that will meet our highest good. And I have to add this is so important. So many people I know pray and God doesn't solve a problem they're dealing with, and they become angry with God. They get turned off to God. Where were you? You know, even Ram Dass, whom I spoke about last time, he had a stroke when he was 67 years of age, and with all his spiritual development, he says that even he lost his faith for a short time. He says, you know, God, were you at lunch? Where were you when I had this stroke? How could this happen to me? This happens to all of us. Sometimes we pray and we ask, and a prayer just does not answer the way that we'd like it to be answered. And a good example of this is my wife Marty used to work on the oncology unit at Virginia Beach General Hospital for 15 years. She says people would come in with these terminal illnesses, terminal cancer. She said everybody prayed. The family, people who had never prayed before, everybody's praying, God, heal my dad. You know, let him be healed. And Dad would still die. Now, how could that happen? You know, we're taught that God loves us and God will answer our questions. How could that happen? And the best answer I ever had to this was given to me by a great spiritual teacher named Emmanuel, who's this being on the other side who channels his teachings through a woman named Pat Rodegast and Judith Stanton, two women. Emmanuel was asked, can any illness be healed through prayer? And I'm feeling some energy here. Emmanuel said, yes, any illness can be healed through prayer, providing you are wise enough to understand that death itself may be the healing. And with that, I'm going to close my talk. Thank you.